Have you ever marveled at the way each part of nature works in harmony with one another to create the world we live in? In the second edition of The Sacred Depths of Nature, Ursula Goodenough explores the miracles of life on Earth and our place within it. Hi, it's Rod Milam with HEC Books, where we explore the latest books with the authors who wrote them. If you've not been here before, make sure you click the subscribe button to be notified of new content. Now, let's find out what The Sacred Depths of Nature is all about. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Rod.
You have many, many titles over the years. You're a professor emerita of Washington University, and you're also a longtime board member of the Religious Naturalist Association. How did you get interested in the kind of natural world and that kind of curiosity in the first place? Was it your background in growing up? You were born in New York City, but I don't think you actually spent a lot of time there.
No, I didn't. I grew up in New Haven, where my dad worked at Yale, and I love the outdoors, and I had a cat and fish and stuff like that, but I didn't really do this until I was in college, and then it just continuously fascinated me.
Your father was a Methodist preacher, is that correct?
He started out that way, yeah, and he was a professor of the history of religion, so conversations about religion and what is religion and what's religious and everything were bonging around my ears when I was growing up.
And what's your academic background?
I was raised in New Haven, went to schools where there was very little science, and so just took this first course when I was a sophomore in college and became fascinated and switched my major from English or whatever it was to biology and stuck with it. And did the usual thing of going to graduate school and getting a job and doing science.
So how did you come about writing the first edition of this book, which I think came out, is it 1998?
Yeah.
When you released it, how did you decide to make this book and who's it for?
In the late 80s, I went to a conference for irrelevant reasons that was run by a group called the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, and they were trying to bring science and religion into harmony, okay? And so I just got the idea that these two things could be thought about in the same breath. And I started reading and talking to people and getting invited to meetings, and eventually got enough stuff in my head that I wrote the book.
What is this book about?
So the book tells everybody's story, and in the first 12 chapters, starting with cosmology, starting with Big Bang and stars and all of that stuff, and then moving through the origins of life, and then evolution of life, and then brains and awareness, and then sex, and then death, and then human evolution. And in each case, I try to write it for a person who's interested and curious, but not necessarily trained, particularly in the current understandings of those topics. So they might have had a biology course in high school or something, but that's not where they are. So I try to explain things in the most interesting and colorful way that I can, while still being accurate, talking about what's really going on. And then at the end of each chapter, I have what's called a reflection, where I think about this thing from my own personal religious perspectives, usually spiritual.
In the framework of the book that you've written, you talk about details about how cells come about and how you have a certain sort of, you have a rock solid knowledge of what is going on. But then there's sort of curiosity around things that you don't know yet, or that science has not explained yet.
Oh, well, I assume that's always going to be true. So I don't spend a lot of time talking about what isn't known. I mostly try to say these are our current understandings, with the caveat at the start of the book that these understandings may well deepen, or almost certainly will deepen, as scientists keep on probing, because that's what we do. There's an understanding, but we don't understand this part very well, so let's do experiments over here and see if we can deepen our knowledge. And so the first edition of the book versus this edition, there were things that were accepted as being the case in 1998 that further experiments turned out had to be revised.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. So when I was writing in 1998, the consensus was that humans had 200,000 genes. or 100,000. Anyway, over, lots of genes. And then when we actually could sequence the genomes and stuff, it turned out that we only have about 26,000 genes. So I had to change that number.
Can you give an example of what you changed, like, other than some significant facts, like how many genes we thought we had?
Well, the whole chapter 2, the origins of life, was very sort of vague in the first edition because I hadn't really thought that much about it. And after that, I came to a group of researchers who were thinking, we still don't know how life originated, but they had some really cool ideas about how it might have originated. And I realized that in understanding those ideas, one got a much better understanding of how to think about life in general, if you think about how it originated. So chapter 2 is now full of really new information about the origins of life compared to the first one.
Now, most religions actually deal with that as well,
Right,
with the origin of life. So
right, but the origin of life in most religion is a supernatural event that God created, or the Great Spirit created, or their wonderful indigenous understandings of serpents that came out of the sea, and so on. So I mean, and these are all wonderful stories, and I cherish them, and they are part of our culture, and they're part of nature, but they don't map onto what we now know about how the planet works and what it was like back then, and all sorts of other things that have to be taken into account.
So where does the religious sort of component, or the way that you look at, again, we're talking about cell biology, where does the religious portion of that pop up for you, or how you look at it, and how is it presented in the book?
Well, there's several chapters on cells, and in one, for example, I can't remember which chapter, but I talk about how amazing it is that these organisms have come together, and I celebrate my own existence as being so improbable and so astonishing, and talk about my mother's egg and my father's sperm coming together and making me, and that I'm original and will never happen again, and how cool is that? That's a spiritual understanding of mine that helps me to value myself and cherish my life.
And as a scientist and an author, a published author as well, what do you hope that people get out of this particular book?
If nothing else, I hope that my reader plows through, even when there are things that, even with my best efforts, are difficult to understand outside their comfort zone, if you will. And a lot of people come to me and tell me that they were struggling to understand what an enzyme was or something like that. And what I hope is that even if the first time through was kind of rough waters, that when they finish the book, they have a deeper understanding of this wonderful planet that we inhabit. And if they get the science part, that in itself would be a great gift to me. If they also respond to some, or maybe most of my spiritual reflections on these understandings, that's even better, because I've helped them perhaps orient their lives better.
In the next part of this interview, Ursula Goodenough will give us more insight into her understanding of religious naturalism. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to click the thumbs up button and the subscribe button for new content.